Hi, I'm John from Bike Social. Now, we're here today to talk about classic bike tyres. It's easy to get confused because things changed as we went from cross-plies to radial. So I'm here with Gary Hartshorn. He's Senior Product Manager for Bridgestone across North Europe. You've got a few bikes of your own, haven't you, Gary?
I have, yeah.
Trail bikes, adventure bikes, race bikes, everything.
Yeah, quads, everything. Yeah.
25,000 miles a year you're doing?
Something like that, yeah.
So you know tyres. Now, what changed? If we're going to talk about classic tyres, that covers a lot, doesn't it? You're looking at old Hinckley Triumphs, Nortons, the old Nortons, but also going into classic sports bikes like the slab-sided GSX-Rs.
Yeah.
What do I need to know?
Well, what you need to know is sort of late 80s, as you alluded to, the cross-plies and the radials, and we've got an example of each here.
Okay.
And that's when everything sort of changed, and that's when sports bikes changed as well. So you can go from your classic sports bikes to your modern classic sports bikes, like the ZXR 750H1 was probably one of the first ones, and then the Blades. And
so that went to radials?
Yes.
Right.
So that was on radials. But so like the GSXR 1100 beforehand, like the G and the H, they were on cross-plies, they 18-inch wheels. Right. So how you define classic in terms of tyres, it's those two. In terms of bikes, it's an era. So you're right. So this BT45 that we've got here, that can be used all the way from the late 80s back on sports bikes, Triumphs, BSAs, Motor Guzzes, you name it, from the 60s, 70s, 80s. That's what you would use that for. Yeah. Even modern like Triumphs will still use cross-plies.
Oh, what, even ones you buy now?
Yes, they'll still use cross-plies. And there's many bikes out there that still come with cross-plies, like the Kawasaki W650, for example, which is like a new bike made to look retro. Yeah. That would still use, still use a BT45 type of tyre. Then you've got the radial, which will be, your sort of the 88, 89 sports bikes, classic sports bikes, or modern classics. I think they're called, aren't they? Yeah. And that's what you do. So you then go from a cross-ply to a radial. Okay. So from the late 80s, that's what we've gone to.
So let's pretend I don't know how these work. What is the difference?
The difference is mainly the body ply. So on a cross-ply, you've just got cross-plies. And they could go over, you could have two ply.
So this is in the construction inside?
Yeah, inside, underneath this rubber that's on the top. Underneath is what they call a carcass. Yeah. So a cross-ply is literally a cross-ply. You've probably you've heard of 2-ply, 4-ply, 6-ply, whatever, plies like that. You can have odd numbers as well, but that's another story. With a radial, the body ply is at 90 degrees to the way that it spins. Okay. So that makes it a radial. Yeah. And on top of that, you can have another cross ply, or you can have a 0-degree belt which starts at one side and then spins around like that, all the way around, and finishes on the other side of the tyre. But the difference is that is a much softer, more pliable construction.
The cross ply is more...
Yes, than a radial. And a radial becomes very stiff, or can be very stiff. It depends on whether it's a cross-ply or it's a 0-degree. Yeah. So if you were then to use that extremely stiff tyre on a bike that's designed for the softer or more pliable cross-ply, it could cause handling issues because the suspension isn't good enough. Because basically a tyre forms a part of the suspension. It has its own self-damping properties. Yeah. So that self-damps better than that does. So the cross-ply is better than the radial. Right. So what that doesn't self-damp goes through into the suspension of the bike. It doesn't go into the ground because that doesn't move. It will go into the next thing that moves them easiest. Yep. That's the suspension. Yep. If the suspension can't cope with it, it will then go through to the bike. Yeah. So if you put that on, it could cause a really uncomfortable, a very harsh ride. Yeah. Whereas with the cross-ply, it won't. Right. People are under the impression that you get more grip from a radial than a cross-ply. That's debatable. The main reason is that you want to keep that is because of the comfort that it will give you. Okay. It's designed for that bike. The bike was designed in the 80s. The tyres from the 80s, they match each other. Okay. And if you put something like that on, like I say, it can cause issues. Okay, so the load ratings are important, I assume, in with this as well. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you want the load rating. That's a 67H, and that's a 69. So that can take more weight. Yeah. Than that can. So therefore, it's going to be stiffer anyway. Stiffer, because you've got to take more weight. Yeah. So it's obviously with the old H ratings on the GSXRs, the axle weights were probably a bit lighter, and so on and so forth. So, but that's the right tyre that you want. And also, of course, the older bikes, while they were still powerful, they're not got the performance of a modern sports bike. No, they were powerful, but the suspension is, from the 80s. It's what, 30 years old now, isn't it? Yeah. It's all 30 years old. Suspension's 30-year-old technology. Yeah. The bike's 30-year-old technology. Yeah. The tyres are 30-year-old technology. Yeah. Whereas this, VT16 Pro is what, 2011, 12. So it's not that old, and it's designed more for modern sports bikes than it is for classic sports bikes.
But would this be for like modern sports bikes that don't have traction control and ABS, and does that matter in a tyre?
You're best to probably, because this was really designed, the original BT16 was 2008, so probably as traction control was becoming popular, but it was certainly not in the form that you get it now with anti-slide, anti-wheelie, and all the stuff that now comes with the electronics. So yes, if you've got something like an early 90s or anything 90s, early 2000s sports bike like a Blade or an early R1 or something like that, then but a BT16 is probably your best option, because modern tyres like our new S22 is designed to work with all the latest electronic trickery.
So when you say it's designed to work with it, what does that mean? Does it mean that it doesn't have to be as grippy because traction control will sort it out?
No, it just means that we'd probably make it in a slightly different way, because when this was designed, it was designed with the traction control was here, whereas the S22 is designed with the traction, it's all taken care of. So there will be a different approach to the way that the tyres are made. That's not to say that the S22 won't work on an older bike. What I'm trying to say is that it's just because this is an older tyre doesn't mean it won't work, because it will, because you haven't got the power. You haven't got the electronics that the modern bikes have got, so it will be more than good enough. And
that traction control is doing something different to the way the power is delivered, isn't it? That can cause unusual wear.
Yeah, certainly. The traction control, I think, in its early form was like ABS, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. Yeah. So that's like, going back to the smooth power and the way the tyres last, etc. Okay. But because you're relying on it, and it is a safety net, isn't it? I don't particularly like sports bikes personally. I'm too big and fat for them, and I can't move around. But when you ride them, you don't realise it's all there, do you? Yeah. You just go around the corners, you know it's there, you gas it, it takes care of it for you. Yeah. Whereas if you did that on an older bike, you'd probably get yourself into a little bit of trouble, wouldn't you? I think it's just one of those safety nets that you find yourself in.
So these are tyres that are designed for that era of bike?
Yes, exactly that.
Okay. So they've got quite different tread patterns.
Yep.
Does that give them different wet weather performance?
Not necessarily, because you've got to remember that was designed originally, this tread pattern in 2008. Yeah. This one was probably 25 years ago, mid-90s. Okay. And we still use the same tread pattern today. Yeah. But it's also got an old compound as well. Yeah. So it's a very different approach and very different makeup to that. Yeah. Very different technology, know-how. 25 years ago to what we know today. Yeah. So you will find that there's more grooves on this, even though that will probably perform as well as this, simply because of modern technology, modern ingredients within the compounds, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
So on bikes that these are potentially going to go on, there's a good chance they're bikes that could get laid up for quite a while. They might be a person's second or third bike. How would you store these tyres?
If the tyres are off the bike, the best place is your loft, somewhere dark and somewhere dry. Yeah. That's the best place, and somewhere that's not too cold. Yeah. If they're on the bike, get the bike up on paddock stands, so there's no weight, because tyres are rubber is porous, they will leak over a period of time. So if you've got the weight of the bike on the tyres, then at least go back in every week or two, check the pressures, pump them back up if they've dropped, because they will have dropped to a certain... and also
despite them having like a sealing...
Yeah, they've got what they call an inner liner in them, but it's still rubber, it's still porous, and it will still leak. It will leak less if it wasn't in, but it will still leak, because it just will, they do. Yeah. And that's why, my tyre's gone down. Well, it will, over a period of time. That's
so obviously as that's gone down, exaggerate, but your tyre's got a flat spot, it's distorted it, and over time that's going to set.
And the sidewall's probably creased a little bit because of it's gone down. So you then put.
We're not talking about a flat tyre, are we? Where you go in and you look at it and go, "Well, that's flat." We're talking about just
something that's down at 20 psi or 25 psi. So
it can over months. It will. Damage
it could do. Yeah, it can drop. Yeah. So. If you haven't got it on paddock stands, then, like I say, go back in and check the pressures every couple of weeks, and try and put the bike on the carpet, not on the concrete floor, because that will get extremely cold, and then it could cause cold spots on the tyre. Right. We get to a point where if it's really, really cold, in the UK it's unlikely, but it does happen, like last year it did with the beast from the east, it got really, really cold. Yeah. So if it's on a really cold concrete floor, you get to a point where it was called glass transition, where it goes from rubber and grippy to, like glass in it, and it's just brittle and will crack. Right.
And of course, that's in a patch on your tyre.
Yeah, and that's then on a patch on your tyre. So you've got to be very careful. Like I say, mainly in the UK, it probably won't happen, but can and does. from time to time. So rather than take the risk, just stick to a set of rules.
Yeah.
And if you're going to store your bike, especially if you've got an older classic like a GXR Limited, you're probably not going to do that many miles on it. You're going to show it off to your mates down at the local pub. You're not going to, it's going to be stored in your garage. Get it up off the floor.
Yeah. So we've got the cross plies and the radials. Can you mix them? Would you want to mix them?
You can mix them, but there's a certain set of rules which you need to adhere to. So, well, basically, as I mentioned earlier, this is a softer construction than that. So the
cross plies are softer.
Yeah.
And you're not talking about a soft compound, are you?
No,
you're
I'm talking about the construction, as in the carcass that sits underneath what we see here.
Yeah.
So you've got the cross ply, then you've got like what we call a bias ply, then you've got the cross belt radial, and then the radial. And so the first one is the most pliable, then the cross belt, then the cross belt radial, and then the radial. Right. So the rule of thumb is that you either match them, or you put the more pliable construction on the front. So you can run a cross ply front with a cross ply rear. Yeah. You can run a cross ply front with a bias rear. Yeah. You can run a cross ply front with a bias radial and a cross ply front with the full radial rear. Yeah. But if you've then got a bias ply front, you can't put a cross ply on the rear because it's a softer, right? So if you've got a bias, you can then use the cross ply radial. Or the radial. Okay. If you've got a cross ply radial front, you can use a cross ply radial rear or a radial rear. Yeah. If you've got a radial front, then you've got to run a radial rear.
Okay. Yeah. So you can't go softer.
No. Yeah. No. So bit confusing, but if you just stick to that rule of thumb, then you shouldn't go far wrong.
So on some of these classic bikes, we're going to have spokes. Yeah. So these are. Do you do these in tubed and tubeless, or?
These are only in tube, but these are really for the later modern classics, so 88, 89 onwards. Yeah. If you're going back to your earlier Triumphs, Guzzies from the 80s and things like that, most of them will be a tube type rim. Okay. So we make these in tubeless and in tube type. Okay. So you can get them for both, so whatever suits the bike that you've got.
So you can put a tube in a tubeless tyre, can't you?
You
can't put a tubeless tyre on a tubed rim?
No. Okay. But what you'll find with more modern bikes is that even though they're tubeless and will have a tube, but the rim where it seats will be tubeless. Right. So you use a tubeless tyre, but you stick a tube type. Tube within it, just because it's got the spokes, basically. Yeah. So on older bikes though, tubeless. On the some modern Triumphs, they've got like a tubeless tubed rear rim. So it's a tubeless rim where it seats, but it's got the spokes that go in the middle. Whereas a GS has got the spokes on the outside of the tyre, if you look closely. So that actually is still a tubeless, doesn't need a tube. The older Guzzies and the older 70s, 80s bikes, that will be on a tube type rim.
So you have to put a tube
type. So you stick a tube type tyre on it.
So, but although like the modern Triumphs and presumably like W650 perhaps, that is taking a tubeless tyre, it still has to run a tube, obviously, because you've got holes in it. Yeah, because you've got holes in it. Yeah, because it does leak, and that's the only reason that it's there. I get the impression these are like older technology tyres. Does that mean I shouldn't expect them to grip like a, S22?
You would think that, but the bikes that they fit, even if it's a modern version of a classic, like a modern Triumph, for example, they still only have a similar performance.
Yeah, so it's not putting out 200 brake horsepower, is it?
No, you're not. No, you're talking from, let's say a new S1000RR versus a 1989 GSXR. Yeah. There's a massive difference in power. There's a massive difference in technology and performance. But with a modern Triumph versus something from the 70s, they're very similar to each other. The weights are very similar to each other. The speeds and power are very similar to each other. So it will work perfectly okay. Even though the tyre is 15 to 20 years old, it will be absolutely perfectly okay. So there's absolutely no need to worry. And
that speed rating thing, I guess I've heard you say this before, you can over-tyre a bike, can't you?
You can.
Potentially if you put a super grippy hypersports tyre on a much older machine. Yeah. To the layman, you'd think, great, it's got all that potential to grip, but it's not, because you're not getting up to temperature.
No, because you're not getting up to temperature. The carcass will be too stiff. It's designed for heavier and more powerful bikes, and therefore that generates the heat that you need. Yeah. So if you've got less power, you'll generate less heat. So, if this is the tyre that's recommended, then that's the tyre that you should use.
Yeah. So basically, if you've got a modern classic, it's probably going to be this. It could be the 45 still.
It could be.
But if you've got one that took cross plies,
stick with cross plies. Yeah. If you've got one that had radials, then stay with radials.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.